Bandwidth for First Updates Now is supported by AndyMark. Are you competition ready? Go to andymark.com and keep your team inspired. And by the Blue Alliance. Keep up to date on all live and archived First Robotics events and team stats at thebluealliance.com. First Updates Now is brought to you by Twitch. Fun is now a Twitch partner and offering some awesome subscriber-only benefits. Subscribe today or get a free subscription each month when you have Amazon Prime by linking your account and clicking subscribe. Well, good evening, everybody. And coming up on First Updates Now, we have a very special presentation. We're here to talk about inspections and what you need to know to get you through the inspection process as efficiently as possible. From First Updates Now, I'm Tyler Rolds. I'm delighted to welcome on our expert for this evening, who is a robot inspector out of First Mid-Atlantic District and China. I got that right, Howard. It's Howard Cohen. Howard, welcome to First Updates Now, and thanks for taking the time to lend your expertise when it comes to robot inspections.
Thanks, Tyler. Hello, friends with robots.
So, Howard, I kind of just gave a brief paraphrase here. We're going through robot inspections and the process for that. And can you give us a bit more of what we're supposed to expect through the seminar? I mean, are we going to just get out of here? We're going to go to inspection process, 5 minutes, boom, done. We're ready to compete, right?
So I wish inspection took 5 minutes.
All right.
But, this is a process to make sure everyone's playing a fair and even game. But we want to try to, get rid of the smoke and shroud around it and make it very clear.
No, that's fair enough, and definitely very appreciated, I'm sure, from everybody watching. So during tonight's presentation, by the way, we are going to post a few trivia questions in chat. It's on the scrolling text on the bottom there. And if you do get it right, we're going to draw, essentially, these 3 trivia questions. If you know the answer, go ahead and type it in chat. You can spend as many times as you want. You only get 1 entry, but and you do get an entry to win an awesome set of our Team 1720 Bat Hawks that they have. They've been graciously donating these to us. These are super, super cool. If you haven't had a chance to check these out, I would highly recommend it. These things are just, I'm going to put them up on screen here for a second, not Howard's full face, but the Bat Hawks up on screen. These are really cool. They allow you to immediately tell what your voltage is on your batteries. They don't drain your batteries by doing so. So make sure you check these out and enter our trivia areas. We're going to do the giveaway right after the 3rd trivia question. So each person gets it right will be a finalist, and we'll pick one person after that. Don't forget, by the way, too, in order to be part of the giveaway, you do have to either follow, so click that little follow button up there, or subscribe for free through Twitch Prime, or for just a few bucks a month if you don't mind skipping that cup of coffee to help support First Updates Now. And by the way, if you do have any questions for the inspection process for Howard, and make them as difficult as you want, by the way. I don't mind if you make them difficult. He might, but go ahead and tag at First Updates Now with your question. So Howard, before we jump in the doc, anything you want to preface to start out with, or should we jump right in?
Let's jump right in, and I'm sure a lot of things will bubble up as we go.
Excellent. All right, let's go ahead and load up the doc.
All right. So, as Tyler said before, I'm Howard Cohen. I'm a First alumni. And let's see. So what we're doing here is we're taking an overview of robot inspection for the 2018 season and some of the best practices for the season. So who am I? I'm an alumni of Team 25. I've been a robot inspector for 7 years, ever since I graduated. I've been a lead robot inspector for 3. And I'm a member of the First Championship, First Alumni Advisory Team, and you should say that 5 times fast. And I organize an off-season near where I live, Brunswick Eruption. And I just want to be clear, I do not work for First. I get that question a lot.
So how do they pay you then?
They don't.
Oh.
So these are just some of the events that I've done. I'm very proud of the bottom right photo of winning a First scholarship. It's one of the only reasons I can make it to college.
Can you talk a little about that real quick? On the what college you going to? What did you win, and what was the process for that?
So I went to Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey, and it's a very specialized engineering type school. And they had scholarships for First, and that was one of the main reasons why I applied, because I wanted to go into engineering, and I wanted to stay somewhat locally so I could continue to do First in my area. And all the kind of dots lined up, and magic happened, and now I'm here.
All right, man.
So the inspection checklist, I hope everyone has had a chance to see this by now. We're now on Rev 1.1, so if you saw 1.0, you may have seen that you're signing that the robot was in compliant with 2016 rules, but we've moved on. So let's talk about some of the first things right out of the gate are the general constraints of your robot. Your weight, your starting configuration, your volume, and your playing configuration. And a lot of these things you can do at home. You can use a bathroom scale for weight. You can use a tape measure or a measuring stick to look at sizes. And you want to understand how you want to begin the match. A lot of teams want to kind of have the cube outside of the robot, but maybe that's not how the cube will stay in there because you thought your robot might begin with your arm outside, which it can't this year. You're allowed to extend up to 16 inches away from your frame, which means there are many different ways that your robot can extend, but in the rules it says you can limit it either software or hardware. So if your arm could extend freely 20 inches, but in software you can prove that it only goes up to say 14, that is completely legal. And a lot of these problems can be kind of hard to solve when you're at competition. So the earlier you find out, the quicker it is and easier it is to solve it. Another thing that everybody loves are bumpers. The bumpers this year are between the floor and 7.5 inches off the ground. So continuing on bumpers, you have to have 6 inches from every corner. And I get this question a lot of, what is a corner? Just imagine you had a string and hold the string on one end of the outside of your robot and wrap it around the robot. Everywhere the string deflects or every time it kind of turns around is a corner. So if I had a rectangle robot, I've labeled it with red dots and green lines that there are 4 corners, and from the 4 corners you would need 8 bumpers that are going at least 6 inches from those corners. So the hard part of the bumper or the wood backing, a lot of teams like to have it kind of go around the frame, and that's fine, but it can't extend away from the frame more than 1 inch. No bumper can be unsupported for greater than 8 inches if it's less than 1/4 or greater than 1/4 of an inch. So what that's saying is if I have a small gap between my frame and I have another small gap, I can have it almost as long as I want, so long as it's less than 1/4 of an inch. As soon as it's over 1/4 of an inch, that gap needs to be less than 7 inches. And the reason for this is that they don't want a bumper to cave in on a robot when it hits another robot. So as we've seen kind of before, bumpers don't kind of just stop immediately. They're chamfered. They have kind of a smoothness. You need to fill in those corners with noodle. Another big thing that some teams tend to forget is that you have to use 3/4 inch nominal thick piece of wood. And although the rules say plywood, you can use any robust wood, and that's mostly for our international friends like in Turkey, where they can't find plywood as easily. Do note, if you're an international team like, say, Australia or even Canada and Mexico sometimes, it is very difficult to import wood into the United States for the World Championship.
So, Howard, do you have a recommendation in regards to what type of wood, even if you're in the States, like some alternatives to plywood that could be used either in the States or in different countries?
I really recommend using plywood. It solves a lot of problems, and then you just do it once. Some teams have used oak, I know, and you get varying levels of success. I just stick to a tried and true plywood, as we already know it's a working material. For some teams that may be difficult to get plywood where they are, if you're going to the World Championship, let some teams know, let people know, so that when you get to the event, people have already brought wood for you and can begin helping you build bumpers. So another thing to note is that the bumpers have to have full noodle, of course, and they need to be 2.5 inch noodles, and they can be hollow, they can be star, they can be solid, but they have to be the same type of noodle, because what they don't want to happen is they don't want it to just become a ramp and robots climb up on top of one another. So another big thing about bumpers is we can tell what number your team is from looking at your bumper, and we can tell what alliance you are by looking at your bumper. So you need to clearly be able to show that you're red or you're blue, and you need to clearly be able to show your numbers. And some teams kind of make this a little bit more difficult than it should be. Just 4 inches with a 1/2 inch stroke. They've made some allowances that if you had a 0 and you want a line going through it, that's okay. As long as, and I kind of put it, if a scout in the crowd is able to read your number, I'm happy with it, but it's got to be 4 inches tall. A thing that I kind of see every year is a team will always tell me, we built our bumpers so that they never have to come off. Well, unfortunately, it's kind of hard written into the rules that the bumpers do need to come off for inspection. And there's kind of a guideline of 6 minutes or whatnot. But if you can prove to me that it can come on and it can come off with, relatively not that much hassle, I'm okay with that. And the same thing with changing your number or your colors. You need to be able to prove that you can do that relatively quickly, especially since some matches you might be playing back to back, especially in finals. So here's some good things to know for bumpers or good practices is if you have a bumper, you want to try and mount it from at least 2 distant points so that you can avoid the bumper rotating. If you only mount it from 1 point, you have an opportunity for the bumper to rotate and potentially fall off. And I know it's told to every referee that if a bumper falls off, that's a potential for disablement. Kind of like, as I said before, you really want to be able to swap your bumpers pretty quickly. And I recommend wing nuts or pins. That tend to be very effective ways to do it. It can save you a lot of time so that you're not wasting your time, in a sense, changing just bumpers. You could be repairing your robot. You could be looking at your next match. You could be strategizing. So here's some really good bumper examples. On the top left, we have some teams that are trying to prototype with their bumper, and they have kind of pins that go in, and they could put a wing nut right there. We have Hawaiian kids with their beautiful bumpers and some of the other ones. And I want to take a note of this bottom right photo. Not every robot you're going to see or that we'll see is rectangular. There's some other exotic shapes out there, and they are still compliant in the rules. That's still 100% fine. They have every corner covered at least 6 inches. So here's some of the things to remember about bumpers as well, is that if you're not covering every corner, there's going to be a problem during inspection. And if your pool noodle is 1.5 inches and not 2.5, we're going to have problems. I always try to bring at least 1 pool noodle with me to every competition because I know there's going to be a team or 2 that needs it. Another thing is bumpers not mounted properly. Theoretically, I should be able to grab your robot by the bumper and be able to throw it. If your bumper is really, shaky and rickety and it's falling off as I hold it, that's not going to work too well, especially if you get hit by another robot or if you hit into something. Another common thing is a wooden bumper the wood backing to the bumper does not fully go the entire length, and that's not good enough. You need to be able to go that entire distance of it. Sometimes teams also don't get 3/4 inch thick wood, and that also can present a problem later, especially as you go further and further into competition. So let's move on to mechanical now. And a lot of these are kind of just safety things of no sharp edges, no prohibited materials, no unsafe energy storage devices. So sorry, guys, no nuclear reactors. We want to make sure there's no risk of damage to other robots. So you don't have like a spear and you become a lancing robot. And no risk of damage to the field. If your strategy was to destroy the scale so that teams couldn't score on the scale, I'm sorry, but I have bad news for you. A lot of teams like decorating their robot, like 254. They like to put all their sponsors. They like to make a really clean robot. That's perfectly fine. We really do like that. Just make sure that it's in good humor, good gracious professionalism, and try to avoid the same color as the power cubes this year, as you might be becoming distracting for some cameras and sensors. The frame perimeter not being articulated. So the robot has a frame on the outside of metal. And what we're saying here is we don't want it to move. If you open your arm and suddenly your frame has now changed shape, that's an articulating frame. And finally, the end game, you should be able to remove an object from your robot without power. That's fairly simple this year. It's been harder in some other years. So I know a lot of people love this thing of the cost accounting worksheet, or the CAW, as some people call it. Just know that the maximum is $4,000. And there are a couple of rules and blue boxes that you can read about it. You can read it at your own leisure. And if you have questions, let people know. And the Q&A goes pretty lengthy about it at times. Just know, in general, if it's a kit apart item, you don't need to put it. If it's not a kit apart item and it's not commercial off the shelf, then you might need to put it. And it's better to put it and then not have to worry about it than kind of have something missing.
So, Howard, if I can ask, with the $4,000 limit, and this is a topic of discussion we've had prior on our shows, so that is only for not COTS then, right? So anything that's COTS does not count towards the $4,000, or how does that work?
So if it's less than $5 and it's COTS, it doesn't need to go there. And if it's kit of parts, and that means if it's on first choice, if it's in the rookie kit, if it's in the regular kit, that's a kit of parts item. So a sim motor is on the kit of parts, and I can have a lot of sims this year. You don't have to put that on your cost accounting worksheet.
So how do you truly verify that it's $4,000? And is that something where you just look at the cost? I always want to call it a bomb, but cost accounting worksheet, and you just say, okay, this makes sense overall, or what is kind of your process behind that?
Well, to kind of pick through it, because I'm going to talk a little bit more on the next slide. Um, I personally like to spot check a few things. Like last year, a lot of teams had a ratcheting wrench that kind of helped them from back driving while they were climbing. And if they told me they had one, I would look for it on the cost accounting worksheet because that is, something there. So to kind of go to the next slide here, I was graciously given this cost accounting worksheet from Team 900 and Marshall. Thanks, Marshall. Um, Here they have a bunch of different things listed. So they have, a 64 tooth, 1/2 inch hex gear. Well, if I see it and I want to spot check it, I could just say, all right, where is it on the cost accounting worksheet? I know it's a COTS item, but I know it's more than $5, so it should be here. And I personally am not a huge stickler. I just want to see that you've done your due diligence, you've done your homework. Because if you're doing first and you're trying to do engineering and you're trying to like kind of understand the world of engineering, it's not engineering unless you document it. It's not science unless you document it.
So we did have a question in the chat, and we have a few, but I want to get this one specifically because it's right about what you're talking about. There was a question from Steel Hero 97 who wants to know when doing the CAW, do you consider KOP items only from this year, or what about KOP items for previous years?
From this year,
I should say
because the
kit of
kit of parts
parts.
can
Yeah.
change from year to year. You gotta remember, you gotta treat first in a vacuum only this year. There's only very specific times where it first says from this kit of parts or any other kit of parts. All right. So some of the pitfalls in the mechanical section is kind of sharp edges. And there's a kind of stipulation in the manual that says if you have a leading edge that's less than 1 inch by 1 inch, it will invite an additional inspection. And what that means is we're going to take a look at it. We're going to try to understand how does this piece interact with the field? How does this piece interact with your robot? Is there potential for someone to get hurt? Is there potential for another robot to get hurt, the field, and so on and so forth? And ultimately, we may ask, hey, can you file it down? Can you put something over it? Can you, put some tape over it, trying to blunt the edge so that if you have a power cube in front of you and it's the hollow side and you ram right into it, you're not just poking holes into all the covers. Some of the other things is do your homework for the CAW. It's something that you know is going to be handed, and we're going to look for it. It's something that we're looking at. Just do it ahead of time. Uh, as I said before, avoid using the same color as power cubes. It could throw some teams off, and we want to try and give every team the greatest chance of success. Check under your robot for bolt heads, especially this year as we're kind of driving up on top of platforms and whatnot, and there's a bump on the field. You want to make sure that those bolt heads aren't hindering your movement and you're not damaging the field at the same time. So now we're going to kind of go into our first trivia question. In the inspection checklist, it says that there are no lasers. However, there is one type of laser that is allowed this year. And does anyone know what it is?
So if you do know the answer, go ahead and start typing that in the chat. If you're watching live, don't forget you do have to follow or be a subscriber to be eligible, and we're going to draw a finalist based out of that. So Howard, can we take a couple of Q&As if you don't mind?
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, so we have, going back to talking about bumpers, there was a question from Jamieson asking, in regards to plywood, what about marine grade plywood legality or pressure treated?
So the rule simply says robust wood. And kind of the way I would look at a robust wood is if I were to kick it or if I were to expect a robot to ram into it, is this piece of wood going to break? Is it going to fracture and potentially leave your robot or that robot at risk?
All right, our next question is from Catherine in chat asking, as an inspector, this is more general, but as an inspector and as a participant, what's some good tips to keep track of all the team updates and Q&A responses and inspector checklist changes?
So personally, I like to check all the websites on Wednesdays and Saturdays, which is one day after they post the update. So I know that if First was going to post an update, they've already done it. Because we've seen First post updates as late as 5, 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. And other times they post it at noon. So by doing it the day after, you kind of guarantee yourself to see the latest update. And what I personally do is I always print out a manual or I look at the manual when it comes out and after the first update. And then I do it every 5 updates because While a lot of things do change, a lot of it stays the same, and a lot of it is just wording changes. And if it's just a few wording changes, I just make notes of that. But the big thing are the Q&As, and I search it by answered questions and answered. And if you do that, you kind of remember your last one or you write it down. You can kind of see where you were and where you're going. That way, you can kind of make sure you've seen everything, you know everything, and that you're kind of arming yourself with the most knowledge.
All right, we do have a couple more questions, but we'll save those for later. So let's go into a couple more slides, and then we'll draw a finalist for the trivia question.
All right, so the next part of the inspection checklist is electrical. And oftentimes when I'm doing inspection, not everybody knows what everything is, and that's okay. If you ever have questions, just look it up. This is not a quiz. This is not a pop quiz. It's not a test. You can look up the answers. And I actually found this off of Team 358. Thank you, Mark McLeod, because I know he saves everything. This is very helpful. Even though it's a little bit dated, it still has everything that we're looking for. So to kind of just move right along, we don't want you to modify any of the electrical components more than what really needs to be done of, trimming wires, soldering wires, things like that. What we're saying here is, I have a sim motor, don't drill a hole into the sim motor. I have a battery, don't drill a hole into the battery. Try to look at things straightforward. You don't always have to go, super complicated. One thing though that tends to be a little complicated is battery. You can only have one 12-volt battery on your robot. There may be some teams this year that want to have some ballast on their robot by having additional batteries just as weight. No, you can't do that. It explicitly says one. However, you can have other batteries. A COTS computing device or camera can have a 20,000 mega amp hour COTS USB battery that can be plugged into it for that COTS computing device only. So what we're saying here is, let's say I have, we'll call it a cell phone, and that cell phone is being used as a camera and it's hooked in and whatnot. I can have a separate COTS USB battery device charging it or powering it. What I'm not saying is you can't just have that device powering some random thing like a motor off your robot. It has to be some type of computing or sensing device. Visible PDP. So we need to be able to see your PDP. We need to be able to kind of look at your wires, and you also need to do that too somehow. So if you kind of put something right on top of the PDP and you can't get to it very easily, that might be grounds to, kind of take a look at what you have and maybe, move it somewhere a little bit easier. And then the big one is the main breaker, the on-off switch of the robot. If your robot's going crazy and we can't stop it, it's lost communication with the field, it's just going, we need to be able to turn you off somehow. And we need to not be able to also risk a person's hands or fingers while doing that. So allowable PDP breakers, and you see that on the right there, snap action breakers can be inserted, and there's a couple different flavors of them. You can get 40, 30, 20, and the manual tells you kind of what kind. The radio, same radio as last year, and maybe not the same radio as next year. So remember it, you got to look at it year by year. This year you can do it a power over Ethernet injector, or you can come right off the VRM. It's kind of up to you, or you can do both. It has to come out of dedicated power terminals. So you kind of want only the one thing going to it.
Howard, what's a VRM?
The voltage regulator module, and we're going to kind of see that, I think, in a second. So on the bottom right of this PDP picture on the left, you can kind of see the VRM right there. Wire size is very important this year. You want to make sure that you're carrying the proper loads and currents through your wires. You don't want to potentially cause fires. You don't want to potentially cause injuries. And you need to know that if you have a 40 amp breaker, you need to have 12 gauge wire. And it's very clear called out in the manual that they're looking for copper wire. If you're using aluminum or something else, they don't have the same current carrying capacity as copper does, and you may have to bump it up a gauge. So just be aware of that. And just remember, as gauge numbers goes higher, the wire size gets smaller. And that's kind of counterintuitive to a lot of people. So just be aware. Only one wire per Wago. So what a Wago is are those red and black things right on that giant thing in the center, that PDP. Only one wire can go in there. If you want something to kind of split off, you have one wire and that splits into a Y. There's a table here right out of the manual that kind of says what breakers need to go into what and kind of how many things need to be there. So if I have a VRM or PCM or a pneumatics control module, you can have up to 3 under a 20 amp breaker. And just because we say 40 or we say 20 doesn't mean you can't put a 10 amp breaker in there.
All right, let's go ahead and do our trivia drawing and find out who's been entered as a finalist. And if you do win, I don't need anything from you right now, but you'll need to stick around in case we do roll your names in the end. And the winner for this one is AM Boy Scout. So you are entered as a finalist for the giveaway near the end of the show. That'll take place after trivia question number 3. So we'll save your information. Congratulations.
So there's a lot of motors and legal motors this year, and you can take it right out of Table 8.1, R33, and all these motors are legal, and there's a variety of different motors. But the one big thing we want to remember here is this year, more than 6 sims. Yay! I can't wait to see how many main breakers pop. So there, you got to know that if you have a motor, you also need a motor controller. And there are many different ways you can do this. You can have a sim motor under one motor controller, or you can have some type of automotive or never rest motor up to 2. And I'm not going to just read off these tables. You can read them on your own leisure. It's in the manual. Read the manual. They do need to have a PWM or a CAN bus connection if you want to do more things. You can do either one. There's no rule that says you have to do one way or another. Something that I want to remind teams is just because you can have all these motors on it and all these different things doesn't mean you have to do it. There's no rule that says there's a minimum. So something that not many teams use are electrical actuating solenoids. And this doesn't seem to be as popular here, at least where I am. But if you do, you can only go 1 inch. And that's probably one of the main reasons why a lot of people don't use them is that 1 inch stroke. So as you see on the right-hand side, that's 1 inch. So take it as you will. Again, you don't have to use it. If you are using it, make sure to bring documentation because unlike a sim motor, this isn't something that every robot inspector is going to have seen. You want to kind of arm yourself with that knowledge of saying, hey, this is what we're using, and this is what proves that it's legal. So you have different type of motors and actuators, and they can be driven, and they have to be driven by the PWM signals from the RoboRio or CAN bus. They have to originate from the RoboRio. You can't have your previously done COTS USB computing device controlling some motor. All of it has to be relayed through the RoboRio. Some teams like to make their own custom circuits, and that tends to be LEDs or some other sensors that they like. And that's perfectly okay. But again, all motor driving stuff has to come from the RoboRio, and it has to be less than or at 24 volts. You can read more about it on the tables about the amperages. I believe it's 40 amps. If you are using a PCM or pneumatics control module, which you are not required to, it has to be controlled on the CAN bus from the RoboRio. A spike as well, again, you don't have to use it. If you want, that's also a legal configuration for a compressor, and we can talk more about pneumatics later.
So, Howard, one question I want to ask. This brings me back to a few years ago. I remember my good friend Al Skirkowitz seeing 6 sims as a drive in our robot, and since more sims are allowed now, I remember him cringing to there being 6 sims. So, I mean, what do you recommend so teams don't brown out or don't have major issues if they're looking at doing more than 4 sims on their drive or something like that?
So first thing you got to do is you got to be aware of what the problem is here. The more sims you have, the more potential you have for current draw. And the main breaker is a 120 amp breaker. So if teams remember the 2014 days, there was a lot of teams that were, head-on collisions, trying to push one another. And sometimes when you would push, you would turn off. And they would want, why do we turn off? And it's because their main breaker popped because they were pulling more than 120 amps out of their battery. And this is a safety thing. That 120 amps is a lot of current. So there are some ways to kind of avoid this. You can either A, choose not to get into a pushing fight. You could B, have software limits that if it does notice you're approaching 120, it backs it off a little bit. Or you can C, kind of recognize that while you're driving, hey, I should back off or I should, maybe not push as hard. So there are a variety of different ways, even some that I haven't included, that can kind of help you here. You can even put a smaller breaker on there if you wanted, on the PDP or the power distribution panel. So kind of jump back into this. An isolated frame. We want to make sure that your frame is not carrying current. And a lot of teams like to power coat their robot. So if we want to take an accurate reading, we're going to have to scratch the paint on your robot to get a reading from the frame. This is important because we don't want a team to touch another robot and then all of a sudden there's an arcing of electricity. So some of these gold star activities for electrical are to keep your radio, your power distribution panel, your RoboRio easily accessible and visible. If your robot all of a sudden stops working on the field, If these are easily visible and some of the field staff can take a look at it, it can more easily help you diagnose problems right there in the field. And potentially you could start working again during that match and it's not, dead on the water. Manage your cables and your labels. So I like to try to label every wire on the robot, and I just use a small label maker and put a tag on it. That way I know if I have to reroute something, I look on one end, I look on the other end, and I just pull it out. Um, a lot of teams kind of make a web of wires, and it's not exactly very helpful when we're trying to, do inspection, or helpful if you're a CSA trying to diagnose a problem on a robot. Um, some things, people that are not as confident with electronics, you may have a colleague inspector wiring. Make sure you haven't done something, not as smart as putting black to red. Just these sanity checks are really helpful to make sure you don't fry things.
Hey Howard, just
Um,
jump in. I'm sorry to interrupt. Right now, we're currently seeing the electrical, like the first electrical slide still. So I think we're a little bit behind. If you can check your slide deck.
hmm, I think that might be a Skype issue. Let me see if
That's
I
fine.
stop sharing.
Yep. Now you're back on the right one. We're good
All
to
right,
go.
cool. Let me know if that happens again.
Yep.
So have a colleague inspector wiring. It's always great to just have a second pair of eyes. Make sure you don't burn anything out. Periodically check for shorts. Competition is pretty rigorous. You get shaken up a lot. And one of the things I have on my checklist is after every match and before every match, check for shorts. Make sure that nothing is browning out. Make sure nothing is now touching the frame that shouldn't be touching the frame. And it's very helpful because sometimes you might find a wire that's loose and it'll save you in that next match. Watch your current limits. If you have a 40 amp breaker, and you're trying to drive a lot of current, like that 6 sim that's Tyler was just saying, you're going to pop it. And same thing with a 20 amp breaker, a 120 amp breaker. So some of the pitfalls that a lot of teams tend to have with this is the proper wire size and color. You know, some robot inspector will go through every single wire and look at every single color to make sure it's legal. And that's, fully through the inspection process. You need to be able to prove to us that it is legal. And if you have the wrong gauge or the wrong color, we're going to ask you to replace it. We're not going to just leave you in the water. We're going to try to help you find the wire, help you find the color that you need. And that's oftentimes where spare parts or another teammate next door might be able to help you out. If your electronics are acting up, talk to somebody. This is, we encourage teams to help one another. We have a CSA, we have robot inspectors around. Ask for help, flag someone down. This happens mostly with international teams of make sure you're using legal motors and motor controllers. I've seen some pretty exotic things out there. If it's not on that list from table 8.1 or 8.2 or 8.3, it's not going to help you out. And just because it's legal in one year does not imply it's legal this year. The main breaker, there was one team I had that put their main breaker underneath a plexiglass sheet. So when their robot was running, there was no way to hit the main breaker to turn it off. So I asked them, how do you turn the robot off? They said they just unplug the battery, which adds some other fun there. Insulate your battery terminals. You don't want an instance when some type of metal piece, touches the two leads on the main breaker or touches the battery main leads. So just keep them insulated. Use electrical tape. Keep the radio power cable in. This happens a lot during finals that robots are hitting and gently does that power cable start to slide out. So a lot of teams like to put a piece of tape over it. Keep the battery secured. If you flip over the robot, the battery should still stay in relatively the same spot. So if you're hitting, you're getting all that, you need to make sure that your robot battery is staying there, especially as we kind of lift up this year. You want to make sure the battery's not dangling out of the robot. So here comes our next trivia question. What is the maximum number of sim motors a team can have wired properly? Wired properly is the key here.
Looking at this, I think it's going to be at least 100, personally.
I don't know if a robot can have 100 motors and still make weight.
So for the maximum number of sim motors, is that based off something in the manual, or where would somebody find the answer for something like this?
You're going to have to look at the limitations of the particular hardware that itself.
All right. So I haven't seen a correct answer yet, so we'll see what that would be. There is a number. And you can dispute Howard on it afterwards if you feel it should be something different. So, 'cause I don't know the
Yep,
answer. I don't know the
I'll take
answer.
all the blame. If I'm wrong, that makes it so that I remember it more.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll get a couple. I just saw a couple correct answers, so we'll see if more people can figure it out. But it's going to be interesting to see. So if you're interested in this, once again, make sure you click the little follow button up there. You do get a chance to win. So a cool set of Bathawks for 1720, and if we do draw your name in just a few minutes, then you'll have a chance to be a finalist, and we'll draw the three finalists for a winner at the end of the show. I do want to catch up on a couple questions that we had, specifically about the last segment you had. So Jamieson asked, with regards to the cost economy worksheet, this is a little lengthy, so bear with me. Who has precedence in regards to robot legality, LRI, or rules? Example given, the KOP is defined in the rules as any item listed in any kickoff kit checklist, first choice, or PDV. This does not specifically say this current year. If an LRI argued that it meant this year, how would you refute that there is no explicit definition?
I would probably say let's take another read at the rules. There's a fun little section, 1.5, that a lot of people just gloss over that kind of says how to read the rules. And it says there, and let me see if I can kind of pull it up and I can kind of just quote it. Um, they want you to kind of read the rules kind of exactly as it's written. Let's see here. If I pull this to the side, does that show? No. So I'll just read it for
Yeah,
now.
that's fine.
The intent of this manual is that the text means exactly and only what it says. Please avoid interpreting the text based on assumptions about intent, implementation of past rules, or how a situation might be in real life. There are no hidden requirements or restrictions. If you read everything, you know everything. So something So I didn't fully answer Jamie's question, unfortunately, and I'm going to do that right now. If it's in the kit of parts, it doesn't need to be on the call. All right.
We'll go a little bit longer, and then we'll go ahead and draw for a trivia winner.
All right. Moving right along, pneumatics. So this is kind of bittersweet for some teams. If you don't have pneumatics, you can skip this section. Don't need to worry about it this year. If you do have pneumatics, well, let's take a look at it. So this is kind of a standard minimum pneumatic circuit on a robot. And again, you can get this right out of the manual. So if you don't know how to wire it, it's in the manual. You have a compressor, air tanks, gauges, pressure switch, a bunch of different things. So let's look right at the rules. No modifications. Do not modify pneumatic parts. There's a lot of potential for danger here. Some of the older compressors have it so that by default, the compressor is pointing inwards towards itself. And a lot of teams, oh, this is not convenient. I want to make it go another way, and they'll unscrew it and they'll modify it now. That is a modification, and that's not allowed. And I see that every so often. They kind of broaden the range now, so there's a variety of different compressors that you can use as long as it's a maximum 1.1 flow rate. Do not paint, do not coat, do not drill your pneumatics. And there's a fun story of Andy Baker and his robot when they painted their pneumatic cylinders. You can have some small identifying labels on the pneumatic components. That's fair. Tank 1, high pressure gauge, the list goes on. So compressor power has to come from a PCM or pneumatics control module or a spike. And as we saw before, the spike in the electrical section. It has to be wired directly to the Robo Rio. That there's to, if the robot is disabled, the compressor should stop. If the robot's enabled, the compressor should start. The control system is smart. It knows that if your voltage is going down, that it tries to cut power to the compressor because it knows it's one of the biggest current and power draws to the robot. You can have multiple PCMs, but they're gonna have to go under the Robo Rio under a 20 amp breaker, and you can have a maximum of 3 again per slot. And then there is the pressure switches on the left right there. These come pre-calibrated. If it's out of calibration or it's broken, get a new one. The compressor relief valve, and I'm trying to go through these components kind of one at a time to really show you what they are, because a lot of students and adults, frankly, don't know what they are, don't know what they're called. Um, I find a lot of these either screwed all the way down or screwed all the way up, and that tends to be because some bored individual needed something to do. They have to be hard fitted right onto the compressor. And the reason here is we're worried that if you use a plastic tubing, those compressors get pretty hot and it could melt and you could fail and it could fuse right to the compressor. Another thing is your robot's moving and all of a sudden your arm comes down on the tube and now there's nowhere for the air to go from the compressor. And we don't want to have a dangerous interaction. The next is the vent valve plug. There's a lot of different usages of it, and there's a lot of different places you can put it, but you need to have it so that you can release your air safely.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a quick break here and draw for a trivia winner. So, Howard, by the way, I do want to. Somebody in chat is challenging you. Well, there might be a couple challenges here. So, one is on that. Apparently, Andy Baker painted the Clipper tanks, not the cylinders.
So pneumatic cylinder, clipper tanks,
all right,
semantics.
well, and I don't know the answer, so I'll let you two fight that out. But with that said, we had a lot of different answers. A lot of people guessing unlimited. There was 8, 14. I saw 16. One of those is right. So can you give the answer, and then let's talk a little bit about why it is that number for it.
So the answer, if you just read the rules, is unlimited, but you have to wire it properly. So there's only 16 slots off the PDP. So, you're going to have to kind of fight yourself. What do you want to have on there?
All right. So the keyword that we're looking for was 16, and the winner for that is OMC1223. So you are entered as a finalist to win the 1720 Team 1720 Bathawk. So we'll keep your name and draw after our last one as well. So congratulations, and thanks for following since December 18th. Somebody also posted in regards, is there anything like for the slots about how many 40 amps there is or anything like that? Is there just, there's 16 slots, therefore you can have 16 sims?
So that's just a straight reading. You can have up to 40, so that doesn't mean you can't put a 10 amp breaker on there.
Very cool. So somebody said you can use the sim as a counterweight, so technically you could have a
well, that's not properly wired, is that?
All right, so we'll move on here and keep going with the presentation. We have one more trivia question coming up. So Howard, keep rocking it.
All right, so a lot of teams elect to not have their compressor on the robot, whether they want to save weight, save space. A lot of teams don't want to do it. And that's perfectly fine. You can have an off-robot compressor, and during the inspection process, we're going to want to see it. So there are two different main ways you can do it. You can have the stored pressure gauge on the off-robot side, or you can have it on the on-robot side. You can have the switch on or off. Generally, you want to try and follow one of these two pictures. It makes your life a lot easier. You don't have to kind of make up this really exotic circuit. Just keep it simple. One main thing that a lot of teams tend to forget is when you charge up the pneumatic, it has to be done with that same compressor. If it's on the robot, it has to be done with the on-robot compressor. If it's an off-robot compressor, it has to be done with the off-robot compressor. And it has to be done through the RoboRio, through the battery, through that entire system. And the reason for that is safety. If you're just bringing in your own pneumatic thing and it's not controlled from the RoboRio, we have no way of guaranteeing that that's safe. If you're bringing your own, industrial compressor, I have no way of verifying that it's safe to use for the system. And if you have questions with that, I recommend using the Q&A, not me. So the next thing here is tubing. They recently changed this to say a maximum outer diameter of 1/4 inch and screen printing rating right on the tubing or supporting documentation. So if you have tubing and they come in a lot of different flavors of color, even clear, my favorite, if you have the documentation that proves what you have is legal, that makes our lives a lot easier. If it's right on the tubing, that makes our lives a lot easier because I can say, oh, it's there, checkbox, done, moving on. The relieving pressure regulator is there to help make sure that you're staying on your working pressure side at or less than 60. And again, because not everybody is familiar with pneumatics, I'm going to just say it. To change it or calibrate it, you have to pull up on the handle, twist to adjust it either high or low, and then push back down to lock it in place. There are 2 part numbers that are called out explicitly. I recommend using those or finding an equivalent part. If you're using an equivalent part, make sure you have that documentation. So gauges. One of the first things I look at a robot when I see pneumatics is I look for the gauges. I'm looking for at least two. They're either on the robot or they're off the robot. And the robot's always going to have at least one. And if I don't see two gauges, I immediately know, hey, where's the off-robot compressor? Again, use a part that comes off the get parts, makes life easy, but you can find your own thing. And if you do, you may need to provide some documentation to kind of prove that it's legal for use. As I kept saying, there are ratings to these parts. There's a lot of safety that has to go involved with pneumatics because there's a lot of stored potential energy here. And it's on the team to provide that documentation. I will just have you run matches without your pneumatics. Until you provide me that documentation and prove to me that it's both legal and safe to use, I'm not going to let you use it. And I'm telling you right now, if you come to competition with that documentation, I look at it, I check box, I move on. Valve control. So there are a lot of different solenoids out there, but they have to have a maximum of 1/8 inch port diameter. And you can do it either through the PCM or through a spike. And you can have multiple PCMs like before. So that the choice is really up to you and the potential is limitless. Just don't plumb them together. And what that means is, don't have one solenoid connect to another solenoid, connect to another. You gotta take it in stride. You gotta plan for what these rules are saying. So pneumatics gold star, what I'm looking for is a team that gives me that documentation that shows me, hey, I did the homework. I'm showing that all my parts are legal. I'm ready for inspection. And if you can provide me that documentation, we can avoid wasting 5-10 minutes trying to look up the part on somebody's phone that's maybe not getting internet. Gauges and valves in easily visible and accessible locations. So if we can't see the gauge, we have no way of verifying or validating that that gauge is correct. So if you have it on the outside of the robot pointing outwards, that's great, rather than pointing downwards towards, maybe a belly pan. Some pneumatics are leaky. I recommend using soapy water to try to detect leaks, or just water, and you can kind of see like where the bubbles pop up. That's something that one of my old mentors taught me. So some of the pitfalls here, I will really want to stress this documentation. This is the difference between having a good interaction with a robot inspector and potentially a not so good interaction with a robot inspector. Avoid placing pneumatics in vulnerable places. So if you're going to put your cylinder in a place where a robot might be climbing on top of you for a climb or for a ramp or whatnot, it may not be the best place to have it. Having that hard brass fitting on your compressor is something that will prevent you from competing. That needs to be there. That's a safety thing, and that's something we're looking for. A lot of teams like having tubing kind of everywhere and kind of going every which way. You want to kind of be aware of where that tubing is and kind of where it's going, so that if you move your arm, the pneumatic tube doesn't just go wide out and grab onto something. If I ask where the high pressure gauge and where the low pressure gauge is, and I get a bunch of blank stares from students, that's kind of a signal to me that, hey, I got to slow down. I got to make sure that what the team is pointing out to me is in fact correct, that all the documentation is in line, because they've now proven to me that they don't know what's up. They don't know what's going on. All right, moving right along to the next section, the last section, power on check. You can almost taste it. You're almost done. And some of these things are things you can do, again, before competition. Unauthorized wireless communications. On the driver station, make sure that the Wi-Fi is turned off. Done. For a lot of computers, it's just a button switch. Sometimes the FTA or CSA or some field staff will go in and ask you to disable it. Just do it. No walkie-talkies, no GPS this year. That was a fun Q&A. As we just said about pneumatics, we're also going to turn on your robot and kind of look at your pneumatics and how they work. And if everything's done properly, your compressor should stop right around 120 psi under the RoboRio control. That's one of the reasons why that's there, is that if you just had a compressor going, it won't automatically stop at 120. You can keep going 150, 160, and potentially cause a dangerous situation. We will obviously need to power on the robot and enable this. And sometimes teams have pneumatics such that their arms will be down if it's in one place, but as soon as they charge up, they move up. And just be aware, I've had in the past a robot inspector, a student, and the robot all be injured during this power on check. So if you know your robot moves, let us know so we can move out of the way. The robot signal light, there's a very explicit way that you have to wire it up, and it goes black wire into the middle, the red wire into LA, and I hope it's LA because I don't remember, and another jumper wire that goes from LA to LB. And I'm certain if I'm wrong, someone's going to correct me in chat. What we're looking for here is that the field staff, the field people, the audience can see whether or not that signal light is blinking. And that's kind of a signal to the field staff and the audience of, is this robot working? Is this robot not working? And it helps us diagnose problems. So making it visible is not just a benefit for you, it's a benefit for everybody. There's a dedicated port on the Robo Rio for this, and you can see it on the bottom right. The black wire faces outwards towards ground. So I find a lot that not everyone knows how to read the driver station. So I kind of took this picture right off the WPI library and, wrote out what it is in a shorthand. And you can kind of read that at your own leisure. We're looking for the driver station is your team number. We're looking that the software versions are correct. And when we finish doing all this, we're going to turn off the robot and kind of verify that when we turn off, there's no kind of stored electricity. All the lights go off, the signal light goes off. And then we're going to open up the pneumatics, and all the gauges should go to zero. All the air should leave the robot. There shouldn't be any kind of hidden power or hidden air inside the robot still. Do yourself a favor. Bring the updates on a flash drive. The Wednesday before competition or Tuesday before competition, check online. Make sure that there's no team update or some update that you need for the driver station. That's happened before. And when that happens, it's kind of a scramble for robot inspectors, for CSAs, for teams to who has the update, who doesn't have the update, and trying to get everyone on the same update and legal. So one of the last things here is the driver station console. It has to be within those specs. Otherwise, it's not going to fit on the driver station. And not everyone has seen how the driver stations hold up, but it's just kind of a metal slab that's perpendicular. And this thing is pretty stable, but if you're trying to put a lot of weight on there, you may not have a great day, especially when robots slam into that wall. This is the only time that a team member is allowed to jump in front of the line to try to save their control system from hitting the ground and getting it back on there. So what are some gold star things here? Everyone has to get their radio kiosk at competition. They have to go get their WPA key. Have one student take the radio off the robot and go get that done. There may be a line, there may not be a line. These are one of the things that not every robot inspector checks, and I'll be honest, I don't check. This problem tends to resolve itself because if you don't do it, your robot will simply not work on the field. So I'm not as always worried about checking, but if I do need to check, I can find out. Check the updates before competition. That includes, team updates in the rules. That includes version updates for competition. You got to make sure that you're having the latest software because if it's explicitly written in the rules, we're going to explicitly be looking. Your driver station connects via an Ethernet to the field. And some team, they have their laptop that's really kind of battle-worn from competition. And there's a little latch inside the Ethernet port. And if that latch breaks, the Ethernet cable doesn't snap in anymore. And it's prone to falling out. So if you do have an issue with that, get like a little USB extension into a USB port. That way it's a non-issue. I also try to avoid USB hubs because I've seen in past, and this has happened to me personally, that these USB hubs may fail. And then you're scrambling during competition. Why is our robot not working? We find that the joysticks aren't, pinging on the driver station. We hit F1, we rescan, everything starts working again. So if you can, avoid using them. And now we've reached the end. All you got to do is sign the form. And sometimes this is actually one of the harder steps because we either can't find a student, we can't find the adult, and it's kind of comical. So all you got to do is sign the paper and you're done.
What, do they just walk off or what?
Sometimes they just walk away. They got to go to the bathroom. They got to take. I don't know. I don't know what's going on.
So this is like during the inspection process, like some they just walk away or what?
So yeah, some teams will just walk away, and it's like, hey, all you got to do is sign the form, and frantically go, hey, I need you to come back.
So maybe
So
stick around. One thing I want to ask you about, like you mentioned, students and mentors potentially being. Do you typically only deal with students, or how does that work in regards to that relationship? Like if mentors jump in during the inspection process, and what do you recommend the teams?
uh, personally, I like only dealing with students so that it's both a learning experience for them because you have this really great design, you have this really fun robot, and now you kind of have to present it. You have to show it. You have to prove that it's legal, that you followed all the rules, you followed all the requirements. And if a mentor jumps in, I'm not going to stop them if the student kind of needs help. But if a person, whether it's a student or a mentor, is kind of now starting to interfere with this inspection process, and I'm seeing that it's delaying us, I may ask them, hey, can you kind of take a step to the side so we can continue, or hey, let's try and get this done. Let's try to focus here. You gotta always be respectful. All right. So dealing with inspection, this is something that I did when I was a student, is always have a rule book handy and update it and read the rules. Um, Now this kills me because this happens a lot. If there's a part, an element, or a thing about your robot that is in the Q&A and you think you're going to get questioned on it, print out the Q&A, bring it with you, bring that team update with you so you know that when the inspector sees it, you have that proof, you have that documentation that you can say, hey, this is what happened. They said this is legal, they said this is not legal. Take a look at this and now make a judgment. It's your responsibility to show proof to the inspector. If you don't prove it to us, we have no way of validating that it's real. And I sometimes like to tell people, hey, you're going to buy a car, and I'm telling you that it has lights on it. You're going to want to prove, you're going to want to have someone show you that those lights work when you're driving. Um, Sometimes you won't pass the first time. That's okay. Take note of what needs to be fixed. And oftentimes when I tell a team what needs to be fixed, I'll make sure that they understand, and I'll ask them to, hey, what is your plan to do it? So they repeat it back to me so that I know that there's no miscommunication. And this happens a lot also with some of the international teams, especially if it's in Chinese. I'll go out of my way to make sure that I'm using a language that they understand so that there's a lot of clarity in what needs to happen. Um, just remember, you don't have to be rude. Just because you're right doesn't mean you need to be rude. And just because things aren't going your way, you don't need to be rude. If you want to have that one-on-one with someone, pull them aside. You don't have to make a scene about it, but just remember to be respectful. Keep that gracious professionalism. Some things to have during inspection that helps make things go faster is having a multimeter for that ohm check, having a flashlight in case things are hard to see, and having a measuring tape so that if we need to take measurements, you have that available. And this happens a lot with that 16-inch extension. And just remember, if you have a conflict with robot inspector, you have a problem, seek out the lead robot inspector and kind of make your case to them. And they're kind of going to be that person to kind of make the case to.
Where can somebody typically find the LRI during inspection process? Because usually that's day one of the event, right? So, do you go to pit admin, or where do you go to get in contact with that person?
So the two places I usually go to if I need to find the lead robot inspector is I'll first look for a black vest. That tends to be the lead robot inspector. And if they're not that lead robot inspector in the event, they'll know where he is or she is. I'll go to the inspection table, and oftentimes they'll know exactly where they are because they'll have written it down, or I'll go to pit admin and try to have them hail them on the radio. At a lot of competitions, and this doesn't always happen in districts though, so be careful. The lead robot inspector will have a radio so that if someone needs to find them, they can do that. Something that I really want to drill into people is kind of the purity of the rules. The game manual is kind of the primary source document of what is legal and what's not legal. Then we have the drawings that kind of tells us the measurements. Then we have the Q&A, and that's there to help add clarity to what's in the manual. And there may be inconsistencies, but just remember, first does their best to try to eliminate inconsistencies. And if you know there's one, bring that up to first. They may not be aware. The blue boxes don't actually carry any weight, even though they're in the manual. So just be aware, they're there to add some flavor. And I cannot stress this enough, not listed on this purity chart is Chief Delphi, Reddit, and Discord. So if you saw it on Chief Delphi, that doesn't mean it's legal.
I just want to say he didn't list fun, so if you heard it on here, that means it's legal.
Maybe I gotta fix my slides later on.
All right.
Now, our last trivia question of the day is, who has the final authority on the legality of any component, mechanism, or robot at the event. And I'm looking for the acronym here.
All right, so it's an acronym. So if you know the answer to that, go ahead and type that in. Yeah, we'll see about this. So I think most people should know this, but if you don't, just look what everybody else is doing. So we're gonna draw for that in just a little bit. And don't forget, you do have to follow or sub to be eligible for it, and we'll draw. And then after we do the third drawing, we'll go ahead and pick a winner out of the three using a random number generator. So we do have some questions, however, to get into, if you don't mind.
Hold on, I just got that one last slide for questions.
Oh, yeah.
And, I want to wish teams good luck. One of the things that one of my old mentors taught me is that if you shoot for the moon, even if you fail, you'll land upon the stars, or you might even make it to Mars.
Very cool. So we do have quite a few questions to catch up on that we had
Oh
from the
boy,
audience.
I have to buckle up here.
Yeah, a little bit. So, first one, we'll start out with maybe a little bit of storytelling from you. And you've had some really cool ventures, of course, in Mar or whatever they want to be called, and in China as well too. So Michael One Woo asked, "What is the most obvious or craziest reason that a team has failed inspection?"
So one year at the New York City Regional, there was a team that was so big that they didn't even come to the inspection station. We told them right in their pit, this robot is not legal. It is way too big. And they didn't believe us. So what we did was we brought a manual over. We showed them that, hey, these are the numbers. What were you thinking? And the mentor just said, oh man, we totally misread this. And, things happen. So the first thing we said is, all right, now that we know, we all are in agreement that this is illegal, what are the steps? How can we help? What can we do? And we got some other mentors, some students from other teams, and a robot inspector, and we worked with them for several hours, helping them be legal. And that's something I really want teams to realize, is that I don't want robot inspection to be kind of an us versus them thing. I want it to be an us with them. Our goal is to make sure you can comply and that you are legal. So if you have an issue, we want to work with you to try and solve it. And that's kind of why I bring Pool Noodle with me, is that I know Pool Noodle is oftentimes an issue, and it's nothing in weight. It doesn't take up much space. Just bring it with me. That way I know that if I need it, I can just give it away.
All right, next question is from Noathy07. Asks, what would an inspector do if the robot's bumpers are just millimeters above the 7 inches rule? So what's the flexibility on that?
Well, if it's 7 inches, you're fine because it's 7.5.
Well, that's a great point. Okay, so I read things verbatim as people post it. So how about if it's millimeters above the 7.5? And so, it's metric, it should be fine then, right?
So I'm going to work with this team and say, all right, how did this happen? What's going on? Is there a way that we can make it legal? And oftentimes, if it's pretty egregious, like if it's at 8 inches, we're going to try and make that 7.5. If it's like just a hair over, we might let it slide depending on how things are going, but we're really going to want to push for you to be 7.5. And if it's easy to do, we're going to do it. If it's a little bit harder, we may explore some different things.
Like an arbor press.
Maybe, depending how things are going.
Mallet, any of those things, right?
Mallets have been used before.
All right, next question is from, I'm going to butcher this, Kenrisana. Says, if a robot has LED lights that during a match could change red or blue depending on inputs, would this be considered a violation of mimicking the field, I should say?
So I want to be very careful when I'm answering questions, because I am not first. I'm not an official answer source. I'm going to try to just answer questions kind of the way I see it.
Sure.
And kind of what's very clear in the rules. I don't know if that's very clear. I suggest you post it on the Q&A. And if kind of we remember that rule purity, go to the Q&A, ask them. You never know what they might say.
All right. Next question from AM Boy Scout. Why does the RSL cost over $100 COTS? Do you think it should be replaced by a cheaper alternative?
So one thing that we want to remember kind of about this Allen Bradley light thing is that this is a certified product that's proven to work, and it has different inspection certifications and whatnot. And it also has different functions if you use it in different ways. So it's not that you're buying $100 worth of parts. You're kind of buying an engineered part that's proven for $100. and gotta take it with a grain of salt. This is, we're trying to make things kind of. I don't know exactly what First wants to do here because I'm not First. All I know is this is what's in the kit, this is what's in the rules, and you have to use it.
All right, our next question, and we're going to dive a little deep here, and I did bring it up just for reference. Caltran2410 asks, by the way, he says legitimate question, just to clarify that his questions are legitimate.
Oh, yeah, those make those legitimate questions.
How does Howard happen, or does Howard happen to have any insight as to why double-layered bumper fabric is illegal, but reversible bumpers aren't legal? And he references the QA61, which, do you want me to read that off?
I'm just going to flat say,
Okay.
ask First. I don't know why. Oftentimes, First will put out Q&A answers that I struggle to understand, kind of like last year with Sharpie on rope. If you want more clarity, use the Q&A. Again, I'm not an official source.
Is rope legal this year?
I'm sorry?
Rope is legal this year, right?
I don't know what rope is. It's not defined in the manual.
All right, perfect. So.
A fun fact is, rope almost accidentally was left in the manual.
Oh, tell us more about that.
So as we know, rope was a big thing last year, and First was making the new manual, and it was accidentally left in one of the earlier copies that they have for review. And, some people were a little bit shocked when they saw it. So it was definitely kind of, are we seriously doing this again? And I'm very happy that there's no more rope.
All right, our last question for tonight is also from Mike Wan I wanted to know, would 1/16 inch Lexan sanded down to have a bevel on the end be subject to scrutiny as a dangerous object? Is it a shiv is what he's asking.
So you're going to have to look at it in a vacuum. We're going to have to see kind of how it acts and reacts on the field. And personally, I don't exactly like Lexan because it's prone to shattering. It's not exactly going to survive well in the rigors of competition. So just be aware of the material properties of what you're using. Obviously, you wouldn't use glass because that will shatter and that will cause cuts if someone touches it. So just be aware.
Do you have any other tips in regards to like sharp objects and that sort of thing? What teams can do to typically, a lot of times corners and of course we have to sand down burrs. But any major things that you see during your inspection process to make sure teams are going to pass inspection based on the sharp objects?
So if you take your finger and you're rubbing your finger over it and it's pretty pointy and you're worried about yourself getting a cut, it's obviously too sharp. A lot of teams, are kind of oblivious to this, that they'll stick their hands into their robot, and this happens to me a lot, and they'll be, whether it's zip ties or metal edges, I get cuts all over my hand during competition season because teams won't have filed down something, or they'll have a zip tie cut that's exposed. And, these will cause sometimes lasting scars on your hands. I'm looking at my hands right now, and I have scars all over them just from robots.
Fair enough. Thought we had one more question. I'm not sure. Oh, I did see. So Electronica One asks, in your opinion, what will be the biggest rule change after Week 1 events? If you had to guess or summarize something.
If I had to guess, I don't know. I guess if I really had to guess, it would probably be some relation of the 16-inch extension. And kind of when you're on the platform, does this happen? Does that happen? Or if a robot is kind of falling off the a lift, kind of, and the bumper zone changes, kind of exotic things like that. And then First you're going to be like, this is not our intent to cause issues. These are really corner cases. Don't worry about it too much. That's kind of what I see happening.
Makes sense to me. I have no clue, so don't ask me on that stuff. But
I know the biggest rule change since the first update was probably that RO3 that happened today.
Yeah.
I don't want to touch on that a little bit, is that team update 11. A lot of teams build their robot to be exactly the size limits. And you kind of want to be aware of this. Sometimes you want to design for 1 inch less than this, so that if First didn't do this, you could have potentially been illegal. And you could have been spending hours, days trying to fix your robot. And, you got to be cognizant, kind of just like as I read from section 1.5, we want to be, read the rule exactly the way it is in that line, in that sentence, keep reading the rule. When one of the really kind of popular pitfalls back in 2016 was that 6 inch side thing. That if they had a side that was less than 6 inches, it had the full thing had to be covered with a bumper. But we've seen that the intent of the rule, that first rights and sometimes what people read, tend to not always be in sync with one another. So ask those Q&As, bring it up. Make sure first is aware, because sometimes you might get what just happened today.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up and draw for the last one, for the last finalist. And then, Howard, I'm going to need your help a little bit here picking a winner, because we're going to use a random number generator. If you don't mind going back to your webcam, too.
Sure thing.
So the last one, what we're going to do for the answer, who has the final authority? Howard, who has the final authority in regards to all these things?
It's the lead robot inspector, or the LRI.
So the LRI, that is the keyword we're looking for, and the winner for that, Michael Wanu, is our next finalist. That's a little inside joke, Howard. Sorry. Michael Wanu. So that's our third finalist. So what I'm going to do is I have a random number generator up here, and I'm going to have you. It's between 1 and 3, but I'm going to have you tell me how many times to press the number, the random number generator, and please make it semi-reasonable.
Oh, damn. I was going to say like E. All right. 2 times.
Just two. 1, 2.
Just 2.
And that is going to be ticket number 3. He just got it. So Michael Wanu, congratulations. You have won the Bathawks from Team 1720 that we have up on the screen, guys. And if you didn't win, make sure you check these out on andymark.com. You can purchase these and get a chance in there. So congratulations, Michael Wanu. He's won a couple times, but being a sub has its perks, I'll tell you that. So Howard, before we wrap up today, anything you want to kind of leave us with as we go into the competition season just a couple weeks from now?
Good luck, teams. Make sure you're legal. If you have questions, reach out to people. You're not alone out there. There are a lot of teams that may have the same questions. And one thing I do want to say that's not related to robotics in any sense is happy birthday to my grandmother. She's celebrating her 80th birthday this year.
There you go. And happy birthday to her. So, we're going to wrap up then. Thank you, everybody, for helping make this show possible. And if you want more first robotics in your life, or like what we do, all we ask is just let people know about what's going on. And I really want to give a big thanks to Howard. He's really the brainchild behind this, brought this to the table, made it happen, and really appreciate, Howard, all the great work you did here. And hopefully teams can use this into the future. This is actually going to be, by the way, Howard, I want to point out, there's going to be teams who go through the inspection process, and they're going to bring up like a clip in here and be like, Howard said so, it's okay. And if you guys didn't have that in mind, do that. Just tell them I said it was okay.
Yeah, I can't wait for the other LRIs.
Yeah, so you're going to get some nice messages from them later on. But Howard, thank you so much. And thank you for just making this a great show. On behalf of myself and, of course, Howard, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you to all of our moderators in chat. We'll see you next time on First Updates Now. Talk to you then.
Bye, guys.